really hard to get the students with you and to get them in a state of flow. I didn't know the concept at the time. I wasn't aware of the research on this, but I realized that through hard work, I could get them into a state of flow, and that with a little luck, I could keep them in a state of flow all the way to the end. And I remember then when it was about 5 to 9, that I would look at my watch and I would say, okay, guys, I think we've done enough for today. Weekend is about to start. And then I remember seeing them fall out of a state of flow. That suddenly you could see their shoulders sag. You could suddenly see them realize, oh, damn, I'm tired. Oh, I'm hungry. Oh, I'm thirsty. And so people got up and kind of stumbled out of the room. And I remember stumbling out of the room myself, where 10 minutes earlier I was full of energy and everybody was buzzing. And suddenly the buzz is gone. You're no longer in flow. And suddenly reality sets in and you're dead tired. And so I thought, wow, isn't this amazing that from 1 minute to another, you shift from being in being totally in the zone to being totally out of the zone. And so I later realized that there is in fact research on this, and it's one of the topics that is central in positive psychology. I explained to you last week that it focuses on the positive things in life, not just the things that go wrong. And so flow, it's one of these positive topics. I also explained to you why Fredrickson built her broaden and build hypothesis, where she pointed out that people who are in a good mood, who are experiencing positive emotions, that they build resources, they broaden their perspective, they are able to learn new things, absorb new information. And so you could say that flow is not an emotion, but it is certainly linked to positive emotions, as I will show you. So learning happens when people are in flow. The opposite, anti-flow or negative emotion, is the opposite. You narrow your focus. You don't remember as much from the input that you would when you're in a more positive mood. And I explained to you last week how positive psychology has had a strong impact on SLA research, including an influential book there by Budzinska and Marzak in 21. And I have also published a lot on the topic of positive psychology in applied linguistics. So before going on, I need to explain, give you the exact definition of flow, and refer to Mikhail Saint-Mihai. You have his picture there. He died, in fact, two years ago, and he described flow in his 1990 book as the optimal psychophysical state. So it's not an emotion, it's an optimal state where concentration is so intense that there is no attention left to think about anything else, or to worry, or to be self-conscious, and you lose your sense of time, and you're engaged in an activity that is so gratifying that you would want to continue doing it for its own sake, with little concern for what they will get out of it, even if it's difficult or dangerous. And so he and Nakamura presented this graph, the flow channel, that you are in this flow channel when your skills match the challenge, and when you are not too anxious and not too bored. And so within that flow channel, as long as you are in that flow channel, you will remain in the zone. And so they distinguish between 9 components of flow. The basic and most important one is the balance between challenge and skill. And you may recognize my definition with Peter McIntyre about foreign language enjoyment, that we were inspired by Sail Mihai's challenge skill balance. You only enjoy something if you have the necessary skill to carry out the task. So the skill is balanced with the challenge. There are other components, which is the fact that there need to be clear goals. Feedback needs to be unambiguous. There is emerging action and awareness, total concentration, a feeling of control, transformation of time. So the 1 hour class may seem to pass in merely 5 minutes. Loss of self-consciousness. So you stop worrying about what other people might think about your performance. You're totally in the action. And it's autotelic or intrinsically motivating activity, meaning that you could continue this for as long as you could. Now, before I continue and talk to you about the research on flow in second language acquisition, I would like to ask you when you have last been in a state of flow.
Okay, we have a volunteer coming.
Because the whole point is that I want to show that flow happens also in non-educational contexts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so in my case, I very often get into the flow state when I train martial arts. It's
excellent.
I think
What
it's
martial
something
arts
that
you do?
I think it's Jean-Marc, something that Jean-Marc can relate to, right?
Absolutely. So what martial arts is that?
I train taekwondo.
So how would you describe that state?
It's hard to describe because
Mm-hmm.
when you do it, you just do it. And for example, when I train taekwondo, when I get into this flow state, I don't really think about how I feel. I just am all the action. My whole being is in this action, and there is. I disappear, just like you mentioned, and just like the presentation said. I disappear, and there's only taekwondo, there are only the kicks, there's only the movement of my body, and there's the opponent or anything like that. So my focus is only on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm a karate black belt myself, and so when you perform your kata or when you spar, your mind is empty in the sense that you react instinctively to the things around you, and that's a wonderful feeling. Yeah. So anyone else, except from martial arts, flow experiences in other areas?
Yeah, I think we have more courageous students, or actually the same students who became more courageous.
Oh, great. Maybe
So
they
there
are
is
in
another
flow
one
state.
coming. Make yourself comfortable. You don't need to be. You're invisible.
I know. Okay, hello. So I wanted to share when I am most often in the flow state, which is when I am creating music, which is my passion in life.
Perfect.
And I would describe this state as being so excited about the thing that I am doing that I do not think about the outside world for a moment. And I feel like this is one of the only moments in life when I can truly relax.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good one. Yes. Because you can truly relax because you're absolutely totally absorbed in the music making, and you have a feeling that nothing can go wrong. Great. Yeah, so
Okay,
that's
thank you.
good. Martial arts, music, anyone else?
Anyone else? Okay, we have another person coming, I think.
So martial arts, music, and of course foreign languages. So last time I've been in a state of flow was actually on Thursday, when I was on a meetup from Easy German videos. I don't know if you know them, but those are YouTubers who teach German on YouTube. And they are also podcasters. And we had the opportunity to be on a meetup with them in Berlin. And it was just about talking with other people from all around the world, I would say, in German, obviously. And yeah, that was for me a state of flow, because I didn't think of my work, of my chores, of my friends even. So yeah, just I was totally focused on the meeting, and that was it. Yes, so that was the state of flow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's excellent. That's a very nice
Thank you.
example of flow. Again, you are eager and excited to communicate and use your German, and there are interesting people, and you talk about interesting things, and so suddenly you stop worrying about German grammar and you just communicate. So that's a perfect example. I guess Jakub could probably describe his own state of flow that he reaches when he bakes delicious banana cakes and other things. Jakub, is that true?
Yeah, in a way. But I actually had a different example in mind because, well, my boss made it here today again, which makes me very happy. And I think the last feeling of flow was when it's like you spot an interesting opportunity in research, which combines your research interest, and you can see the perfect person to work with. And then you realize there is not really a lot of time, so you just spend long evenings together going through items of questionnaires, trying to perfect them. And then there is data collection, which happens at 8 o'clock, so you have to make it to meet students, and you have to organize the gadgets to make them willing to comply. And then you start analyzing the data and start writing, and actually it is also a kind of state of flow, because it makes you happy, especially if the data shows some meaningful results.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's another nice example. I would say that writing up research, doing research, running the stats, I get in a state of flow. I totally forget what time it is, and I need to be reminded, or suddenly my stomach reminds me that maybe it's time to go and have lunch. So yeah, flow is exhilarating. It gives you extra powers, and you want to remain in that state for as long as possible. Okay, thank you. Those were really nice examples. So I'll go back to sharing my screen. So I think the examples you gave, they fitted these 9 components. It was clear that you're doing martial arts, so you are performing that activity, or you're playing music, or you're communicating in German with your friends, or you're doing research. So the goals are absolutely clear. You're totally in control, totally concentrated. It happens quickly, and you lose self-consciousness. And it's so rewarding to be in that state. You realize that you are in a special state, and you want to prolong it for as long as possible. Now, the interesting thing is that, of course, this is linked to brain activity. And Dietrich in 2003, 2004, looked specifically at this flow experience and the distortion of time, that temporary lifts self-reflective consciousness, and he linked it to reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex. So people in a state of flow, you can actually see the result of that looking at the brain, and specifically the prefrontal cortex, who is very much in charge of control in the brain. And then in 2004, he distinguished between implicit and explicit brain functions that are central to flow. So the implicit system that is supported by the basal ganglia are highly efficient and automatic, whereas the explicit system, which is more associated with the frontal lobe, where the prefrontal cortex is, and the medial temporal lobe structures, is less efficient. It's not automatic, so it requires more energy. So flow happens, according to Dietrich, when the implicit system takes over and your brain goes on automatic, and you can fully focus on the activity that you are engaged in. So flow emerges when the brain enters in this state of transient hypofrontality that enables temporary suppression of analytical and meta-conscious capacity of the explicit system. So the explicit system is like you watching and asking yourself, what should I do next? What do I say next? What body part do I move next? And that can be useful if you do something for the very first time, but it requires a lot of cognitive effort. It will be slow, and it's good if you have a guitar in your hands for the very first time and you try and think, what do I do with my fingers to produce, and where are the strings, and how do I hold my finger, etc. So all that is meta-conscious activity. But once you know how to play, you don't have to look at your fingers, you don't have to look at the guitar, you can look at your audience, and you're able to play using your implicit system. Now, interest in flow exists outside of applied linguistics, of course, especially in educational psychology. Pekrun and colleagues looked at achievement emotions, looked at students' enjoyment, discovered that it was positively linked with flow experiences, whereas negative emotions are typically negatively linked to flow. So if you feel ashamed or hopeless or anxious, you're less likely to experience flow. So flow is gratifying and motivating. So once you've been in that state, you want to be in that state again. So the actual experience of flow in the moment is dynamic, and it's ephemeral in the sense that it's easy also to get out of the state of flow. And there is no guarantee of regaining that state of flow when performing the activity that you were in flow before, because skills and challenges are constantly changing. And you may have experienced that in classrooms where everybody was in a state of flow, and then something happened halfway through the class. It could have been, I don't know, a fire alarm, or somebody saying something, or some disturbance in the flow. And suddenly you realize that everybody is out of flow, and that you realize, oh, only 10 minutes until the end of class. Well, you probably won't reach that state of flow before. And as a teacher, you curse the things that disturb flow, because you know that it's precious and you can't just recreate it if it's too late. And then sometimes you have to cut your losses and accept that, okay, well, we'll finish the final, the rest of the class, and it won't be a state of flow, but you still do your best because that's your job as a teacher. So flow states depend very much on the social context. It's more likely to happen, to be experienced in groups rather than in a solitary way. Of course, as Jakub described, doing research or even reading a book or playing an instrument on your own could get you in flow. but it is more likely to happen if you have more people around you and there is social interdependence. For example, playing a game together that might boost joy and the probability of being in a state of flow. So the some more academic emotions linked to flow. So frustration, pride, all this are linked to flow states, and these flow states have been linked to achievements. So people who are in flow a lot typically perform better. That's what the meta-analysis by Camacho, Morles, and colleagues showed. I don't know how familiar you are with the concept of meta-analysis. So the authors looked at 57 studies for enjoyment, where enjoyment was linked with flow, and then they calculated a kind of average correlation value. And so they had 25 studies where flow and anger were looked at, 9 where flow was linked with frustration, and 66 where flow was linked with boredom. And so they found that on average, academic performance is positively linked with enjoyment, and that's a moderate positive correlation of 0.27, and negatively with anger and boredom. So if you're angry or bored, you are unlikely to get into a state of flow, but it wasn't correlated with frustration. So you could be frustrated and still get into a state of flow. Just a quick reminder, last week I presented these 3 emotions, the classroom anxiety, that happens in the second language class when you feel clumsy and there is a threat to your ego because you're not as fluent in the foreign language as you would be in your first languages. And then enjoyment that captures this interacting dimension of challenge and perceived ability. It's more than just pleasure. Enjoyment occurs when people not just meet their needs, but they accomplish something new or unexpected. I guess you realize as you are performing the task, you think, wow, I'm speaking German here with this guy from Spain, and we really get on well, and I can explain what it is that I want to talk about. And so you are aware that you are doing something that is really good, and that gives you real deep enjoyment, and it's more than just mere pleasure. And then, of course, boredom, when you are very lowly, you have a very low degree of activation, because whatever it is you're trying to do is either too easy or too hard. Now, there's been research, of course, in second language acquisition on flow. The pioneer here is Egbert, published a paper in 2003, and she established that flow experiences do happen in foreign language classes, that it is linked to the task design, and so she used her own students. There were 13 of them, and established this important thing, important finding: flow happens in class. And then later studies showed that flow was linked to better vocabulary retention, that the dimension challenge skill is really the most important contributor to flow. And that was a study by Aubrey in Australia, then Zimmerman and Pignel, who showed that classroom flow and task-specific flow were only moderately positively correlated. So they measured both. And I already talked last week about some tasks in the foreign language classroom that you may not enjoy that much, and that you might not get into a state of flow. And so of course, if you have a lot of flow in your foreign language class, it is more likely that you will also experience task-specific flow, but it's not a very strong correlation. And then, unsurprisingly, Pignel and Albert showed that people who experience flow a lot are typically more motivated. And Ibrahim then showed that flow experiences are sustained by positive emotionality. Also, a study in Hong Kong, Liu and Song, showed that students' enjoyment was linked with flow, and that games are typically good also for getting students into flow. So digital game-based vocabulary learning, people had clearly had positive effects on flow experiences. They felt they had learned a lot and felt really satisfied. And then a recent study that focused on EFL teachers in flow by Sobhana Mesh in Canada. He's in fact a great young researcher, and he was looking for relationships between flow and emotional intelligence, personality traits. And what he found was that these 75 teachers reported that reading caused flow outside of the classroom, and that within the classroom, it's the delivery of lessons that was flow inducing. So teaching a good class, it can help the teacher reach a state of flow. And I think that through the process of emotional contagion, the teacher who is in flow will in fact share that flow and will manage to get the whole group together and push everybody or pull everybody up into that state of flow. And then he found also that flow was linked to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, which is the ability to understand your own emotions and the emotions of people around you. I think it's a crucial personality trait for teachers. Teachers need to feel the emotional temperature of the room, of the people in the classroom. So if you have that emotional intelligence, then it's going to be easier to help get people in flow and get yourself in a state of flow. And finally, he found that conscientiousness and openness to experience predicted flow states, and explaining 22 and 33% of variance, which is quite a lot. So it means that some people are more likely to reach a state of flow. And then there's been fascinating neuro research on flow also in Japan. Nozawa and colleagues who discovered that 59 Japanese EFL learners who were doing group work or they were either working on their own or with larger groups, and they showed that the people who were working together, and it reminded me again of what Jakub said about doing research with the colleague and discussing data and coming up with ideas, etc. I would bet that there was interbrain synchronization, so that when you are in a state of flow, you are really on the same wavelength, and your brains synchronize, and that gives a strong feeling of togetherness. And so they showed that the within group pairs were more strongly synchronized than the cross group pairs. So with Peter McIntyre, we've been talking about flow for a while, but the first attempts at publication, our first drafts were rejected by 2 journals, and then we gave up on it, and then a couple of years later we restarted working on it, and then the paper finally came out last year, and we used the database that we had collected in the early 2010s. We used Larson and Selmihai's experience sampling method. So our questionnaire, we had a question: what proportion of time in the foreign language class do you feel that you lose a sense of time, that you're totally absorbed, that you are fulfilled, that you're totally happy, and so percentage of time. And then we calculated the average. And so it turned out that our 1,044 participants reported being in a state of flow for almost 60% of the time, which was more than we had kind of expected. But okay, you have to trust what your participants said. And it was a large sample. And of those 1,044, 581 had also answered an open question about an enjoyable episode in the foreign language class, resulting in over 30,000 words. And so we coded these experiences for 3 dimensions: the source of it, the duration, and the intensity. And let me show you some examples. So the source could either be the self. So, for example, when I nailed a pronunciation on a sentence I read out loud in my seminar group. So you could say that this is, in fact, probably a spark of flow, that it's pronouncing one sentence and suddenly realizing, oh, I got the pronunciation right. That worked. Sometimes it was self and peers, like enjoying the group work that we do in class. Sometimes it's the self and the teacher. I was so happy when my teacher said it was a good job. And sometimes it's the self and everybody else in the classroom. So here, somebody who described students coming to the front of the classroom, facing the screen, following the video together. It's fun to do that. All of us are mobilized. So it's this sense of togetherness. It was clear that it wasn't just the self who was the source of the flow. And then duration, again, an example of a spark. When I can make a sentence without any mistakes, I feel proud of myself. Oh, 1 sentence, no mistake, fantastic. Could be medium range, medium duration. So when the second groups showed their presentation lively and responsibly, I was absorbed totally. So we can assume that that was a couple of minutes. And the duration could be longer. It was like I could talk hours about France. I did not see the time passing. And it was a very interesting discussion we had in class. So this was clearly something that went well beyond a couple of minutes. And then we coded for intensity. At the lowest level of intensity, it was somebody describing the enjoyable episode, saying, oh, it's nice when the teacher uses anecdotes or jokes to explain some grammar exercises. So, okay, that's not very strong, but it was clearly a moment that they had enjoyed. Could be moderately intense when you have to introduce yourself, or including talking about the hobbies. I felt confident and happy doing this. And then high intensity, when the person describes not really remembering the topic of the discussion, but really challenging, very fascinating, a heated discussion. We were very involved. It was very productive. I forgot about the time. So these are clear indications of a state of flow that lasted for a while. So looking at the distribution of flow, we discovered that, as you see, the largest proportion reported up to 60% of the time in a state of flow, a little less up to, so 20% reported being in a state of flow up to 70% of the time. So we have a slightly skewed normal distribution. And then we looked at the relationship between flow and enjoyment and anxiety. And as you see, the left top graph, there is a positive correlation between enjoyment and proportion of time in flow. And there is a weaker negative correlation between anxiety and time in flow. So we looked then at the different levels in the foreign language. We're comparing those who reported being beginners or intermediate learners, or high intermediate learners, or advanced learners. And as you see, the beginners reported being in flow quite a lot, but not as much as those who were more advanced. So what this suggests is that the better you get at something, the more mastery you have over your martial arts or your music, or you using Spanish to have interesting conversations with people that you haven't met before, you are more likely to remain in that state of flow for a longer time, and it will be probably more intense. So here we found that the source of the enjoyable episode, as you see, if the source is just the self, then our participants typically reported slightly higher levels of anxiety, and if the source was more people, then enjoyment would be higher. So here we have the effect of intensity. So as you see, people who reported low intensity in their enjoyable episode, they were typically the ones who were more anxious and weren't enjoying the foreign language class quite as much. And then here we have the link between the duration of the enjoyable episode and the levels of enjoyment and anxiety. And you can see again that those who had described an enjoyable episode that lasted for longer, they were the people with high levels of enjoyment and lower levels of anxiety. And then we wondered whether the target language has an effect. So we distinguished between the students in our database who had English as a foreign language and those who had other languages but English. So they were typically either French, German, Spanish. Those were the most frequent other languages. And what we found was that there was a significant effect between English and languages other than English. So the effect size was very small, but as you see on the graph, those studying other languages but English reported higher levels of flow. And I think that it is linked to the fact that those who learn other languages but English are typically language nerds. They typically already know English and they just love language learning. So although this difference is significant, we were careful in interpreting it, because it might just be that the profile of the two types of learners explain the difference rather than having a different target language. And then with my PhD students, Alfaf Al-Bakistani and Iman Kamal Ahmed, we collected data from Arab EFL learners, both in emergency remote teaching, so online teaching, and in-person classes. So we used an online questionnaire, collected quantitative and qualitative data. We used the method that we had used with Peter McIntyre, the experience sampling method, and we discovered that the students reported significantly more flow in in-person classes rather than online classes, which makes perfect sense because we know that that flow is more likely to appear when people are together, sitting together in a group. And then we looked at the correlations between time in flow and a range of variables. And you see straight away that there are many more significant correlations for the in-person context compared to the online context. So the flow was linked to age, English proficiency, attitude towards English, attitude towards the English teacher, and the teacher's frequency of use of English in face-to-face classes. However, in the online classes, it was only the attitude towards the English teacher that was significantly linked to flow. So we realized that flow really depends on where you are, and that if you're sitting in your bedroom or in your study room watching the teacher's face and the teaching material on the screen, well, you could reach a state of flow, and you can carry out the required activities, but the flow will be shorter, and there will be less sense of co-constructing this flow together with your friends, because your friends are not around and you don't hear them snigger or make comments because their mics are turned off, or maybe their cameras are turned off, so you don't see their faces. So the online classes are emotionally a little bit disembodied, and the learners may feel mentally disconnected from the group and from the rest of the world. So we speculated that just sitting in front of a computer is not just physical and social isolation, but in a sense also mental isolation, in the sense that no man or woman is an island. It's harder to learn on a small island, even if you have a good internet connection. So in a paper that is about to come out in Applied Linguistics in a week or so, we looked at the emotional, attitudinal, and social biographical sources of flow, again in online and in-person EFL classroom from the same Arab EFL learners. And we discovered that enjoyment was strongly positively correlated with flow. Anxiety was strongly negatively correlated with flow, and boredom was even more strongly negative correlated with flow in the in-person classes. And you see a similar pattern for the online classes. And then we ran some multiple regression analysis in order to identify the strongest predictors of flow. And the strongest predictor, unsurprisingly, is boredom. So boredom really kills flow. Enjoyment was a slightly weaker positive predictor. And interestingly, anxiety was not a predictor. And we were a little bit surprised about that, because there was a significant negative correlation. But when you put these different emotions together, you realize that it's boredom that is the best negative predictor, and enjoyment is the best positive predictor, and anxiety drops out. It was a similar picture in the online classes, where boredom was again a strong negative predictor. Enjoyment was a significant positive predictor, slightly weaker than in the in-person classes, and anxiety had no effect at all. And then we looked at the relationships between flow and the 3 foreign language enjoyment dimensions. Just reminding you, we had teacher appreciation, personal enjoyment, and social enjoyment, because we wanted to know what exactly it is in foreign language classroom enjoyment that is linked to flow. And what we discovered was that flow was linked to teacher appreciation, a positive, strong positive correlation, to personal enjoyment, an even stronger positive correlation, but it wasn't linked to social enjoyment, which was kind of counterintuitive, because we had expected that the social enjoyment would be important. And so we ran a multiple regression analysis we discovered that personal enjoyment was in fact the only positive predictor of flow, although the effect size was small. And this is quite interesting, because here is the graph showing you the regression line for personal enjoyment and proportion of time in flow. So we wondered why, and we talked about it with a friend of mine, Katie Caldwell-Harris from Boston University. She's a cognitive psychologist, and she said, well, maybe your learners who score high on personal enjoyment, maybe they are the ones who enjoy extracting patterns, discovering regularities or quasi-regularities. Maybe they construct a generative system of knowledge. Maybe they are the people who love intellectual stimulation. So is it a trait? Is it cognition? Is it a little bit of both? And I like that, the fact that this personal enjoyment was the strongest predictor of flow. And then we looked at the effect of sociobiographical and attitudinal variables. And as you see there, were separate analysis for in-person and online classes, where gender had no effect. Education had an effect, but only for online, so more flow for people with high levels of education. A weak effect for age in face-to-face classes, but not in online classes. The degree of multilingualism had no effect on flow, but there was a significant effect of nationality on flow, both in the in-person and online classes, and I will show you a graph in a minute. Proficiency was not linked to flow, so the fact that you have high levels of proficiency didn't make you more likely to get into a state of flow. But attitude towards English had a significant effect in in-person classes, not in online classes. And attitude towards the teacher had a significant effect in both face-to-face classes and online classes. So if you're like your teacher, then you are typically more likely to spend time in a state of flow. And here the effect of nationality, the three largest groups were the Iraqi, the Moroccans, and the Saudi. And as you see, the Moroccans reported the highest level of in-person flow in in-person classes, whereas the Iraqi reported the lowest level, the Saudi in between, and online flow was highest for the Saudis. And I have no explanation for that. We find this, but we have no way to explain the reasons why, because we don't have classroom observations, so we don't know what happens within these specific classrooms of our participants. And then the attitudes towards English, as you see, if you have a neutral attitude, then you are less likely to reach that state of flow. And again, if your attitude towards the teacher is only neutral, you're significantly less likely to reach a state of flow, both in online and in-person classes. Now, this study of ours has a theoretical implication, namely that the flow channel by Nakamura and Seilmihai that I showed you earlier is in fact not applicable to the foreign language classroom, because foreign language anxiety is not a predictor of time in flow. And so I'm in fact still working on the paper with the two graphs at the bottom, that we argue that the flow channel is balanced between total absence of boredom and enjoyment with relative immunity from anxiety, and that there is in fact an emotional basis of flow and a cognitive basis of flow. So the flow channel are not two parallel lines, but they widen over time. And the cognitive basis, it shows how intellectual stimulation and the optimal challenge skill balance are the y and x axis, and that you grow in a non-linear way, experiencing pleasure when you have a still relatively low level of intellectual stimulation, and your skill challenge balance isn't optimal yet. It becomes enjoyment at higher level, and you can reach a state of flow once you reach a certain threshold of intellectual stimulation, and you get the optimal challenge skills balance. So what are the pedagogical implications? That teachers shouldn't be too concerned that anxiety might hinder learners from reaching a state of flow, because we showed that moderate levels of anxiety are perfectly okay. That teachers who introduce challenging activities at an appropriate level shouldn't be deterred by learners who say, oh no, I can't possibly do this, this is too hard. What, talking to Germans? My German isn't good enough. So teachers should dare encourage their students to take the challenge and not be too disappointed or defeated if it doesn't work out from the first attempt. And of course, teachers should create positive emotional environments that allow learners to feel safe to experiment with the new foreign language without risking ridicule, and so that they can get into that state of flow, and that finding the intrinsic enjoyment in pushing performance to the limit with a teacher who is supportive and peers who are supportive all this allows learners to enter the zone, forget about the world around them, about the time, and boredom is the killer of flow. So if you notice as a teacher that your students are bored, you need to change the activity because you cannot allow your students to be bored. So to conclude, getting learners in a state of flow is really a key to development. I think that teachers can create the right conditions and lift everybody up to a state of group flow. Also, when you have everyone aboard, it creates strong social bonds, and that will also strengthen group flow. And getting learners addicted to flow, I would say, is their stairways to foreign language heaven. And so, yeah, I would be interested to, if you are a teacher, do you use any strategies or any tricks to get your students in a state of flow? I would be really interested to hear about that in the questions. And so here are some of the references, and I would be happy there to answer your questions.
And as usual, you're strongly encouraged to contribute questions. Right, I'll buy you some time, everybody in the audience. So I'm going to provide two examples. Of course, it's professional experience which makes me say that. So first, I think a lot of us thought of something when you mentioned a particular comment from the classroom or from the person who totally breaks the flow. And I can remember a situation like that. Both my examples come from a language school where I used to work for a very long time before joining the university. So I had this advanced class in which there was just one group which was very tough to work with. I mean, they seemed not to enjoy the class. The activities seemed not to work. Those activities worked in other groups. And I think it was partly caused because the students were somehow very different and they did not get very well with each other. But anyway, I brought this great communicative activity with gaps, with roles, and I thought that, okay, it has to work, but it did not. And after when I was already thinking, okay, it's going to succeed this time, they were engaged in the activity for 5 minutes. I saw one student who was usually very reluctant and very distanced from everybody else. And I saw her raise her hand and willing to ask a question. I was so lucky. Like, finally, I managed to get her involved.
Mm-hmm.
And the question appeared, excuse me, do you think you could bring us some exercises for punctuation?
Oh, God.
Which was totally irrelevant.
Oh.
Totally irrelevant, right? The activity was about role playing.
Yes.
Everybody was given a role, and she asked a question which was totally out of the blue. So that's when the flow was totally killed. And I think I had to really fight hard to find my own enthusiasm.
Yeah, because at that point in time, you had to use emotional labor strategies to keep a smile on your face.
Yes.
And not yell at her and boot her out of the classroom, because you know how hard it is to get students into a moderate state of flow, or even just enjoying the class, and then somebody ruins it for you. It's extremely frustrating. I think I have had to exercise self-control sometimes when students did things like that. But you know, I mean, it happens and we remember it, but most of the time you do get them into a reasonable state of flow, and you are happy and flowing along.
Right. The other thing, I'll use the floor for just one more second, is that I think there is something very true about flow experienced by learners of languages other than English. And again, my first observation comes from the language school, and I think it corresponds to the data. So when I was working there, I wrote my MA, and I surveyed 100 of those students, and for English, the motivation was the reason to study there for about 85%. And the English groups were very different from all other groups. So you could see the Italian group meeting after classes and organizing trips to Italy and just absorbing the language, the culture, everything of the language. But the English groups just came there to study English for the profession and for their career. So the reasons were very different. I suppose some of the German teachers could also say more here, because there are different reasons to study English and German. Right, I'm now leaning towards them.
Body language.
It's quite tough in the lecture hall, though. Okay, so if you feel like asking any questions, adding some comments, feel free to come here. You know it does not hurt already. I guess no questions this time.
Okay. Well, I hope I didn't bore them.
They're laughing here. They are laughing here. So it's not true, definitely. I think it's been a very inspiring lecture. And I think we can find a lot of examples in our experience as both learners and teachers. And it's quite easy to refer to flow in everyday life examples.
Absolutely. Okay, well, in that case, I won't stay on for too long, but next week I'm going to talk about something completely different, trilingual first language acquisition, which is a topic that I'm really interested in, but I haven't done as much research in it. And I'm looking forward to, well, seeing you or seeing a glimpse of you next week.
Right. I suppose it might be a bit of a different set of people because, yeah, acquisition is acquisition, and this might attract some other crowds, but perhaps some of those people with us today are going to come too next week. Right. Thank you very much for another super nice lecture and super interesting lecture, and see you next week.
See you next week, and email me if you have questions.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.